introduce our amazing speaker today, Michael-Birch Pierce, we do want to just call out a little parental advisory. Our speaker's artwork later in the presentation has some depictions of the human form. And if you have small children around, they might find those depictions interesting enough to keep asking you about what those things are until you awkwardly answer or awkwardly avoid answering. So again, it's beautiful work, but if you have little ones at home with you because they're on quarantine and they're over your shoulder in the background, as a parent, just decide what conversations you're comfortable having. We'll leave that up to you. All right. So, Michael-Birch Pierce is a fiber artist and fashion designer. They received a BFA in fashion design from VCU, where they now teach fashion design and art foundation. They also studied at the Savannah College of Art and Design for an MFA in fibers with a focus on embroidery and embellishment. Pierce has interned for Diane von Furstenberg, designed and embroidered Christmas decorations for the Obama White House, and served as stylist for Andre Leon Talley's Little Black Dress costume exhibition. They've completed multiple residencies in lots of different places all over the world. They've exhibited in numerous galleries and museums, both domestically and abroad, and they've embroidered portraits at the Oscars, the Super Bowl, Design in Miami, and South by Southwest. You can see Michael-Birch's current work at Quirk Charlottesville, the Linden Row Inn, and next month at the 35th International Festival. Well, I don't know if it's going to happen.
Not anymore.
You can tell us all about where to find some of their work. I personally own several brooches, and I can't wait for you to hear more about the rest of their take on identity. So take it away, Michael-Birch.
All right, let me see if I can remember how all this works. How are you guys doing? Never mind, you can't answer me. Just wave. Okay, I think this is working. Can everybody see this? Everybody's got this screen up? Awesome. So my name is Michael-Birch Pierce. I am a embroiderer, portraitist, and rhinestone enthusiast is what we're going for on my titles. So I'm gonna just kind of go through this talk. It's kind of about, I've got fuzz flying in front of me. It's about artifice and authenticity. I'm gonna just walk you through kind of the story of my artwork and what I make and why I make it, and how it all came to be, and how eventually this artwork that's all sort of really entwined in this idea of artifice and identity, how it ended up helping me figure out my own identity, and some things that I didn't even realize about myself just through making. So yeah, I don't know, should I have a timer on or something? Okay, I'm gonna look at this clock over here. Also, I apologize, I've got a broken screen, so I'm on one camera but looking over here, so if I'm not looking directly at you, it'll be awkward, but deal with it. All right, so this is my artist statement. An artifice is not simply made. Oh God, wait, there's a bubble that's covering up my whole artist statement. Whatever, I'm gonna wing it. An artifice is not simply made, it's meticulously crafted through a lifetime of careful decisions. My work is an intimate study of the self we choose to share and the authenticity of interaction. Couched in the superficiality of high fashion, I use traditional embroidery techniques to elevate cheap and gaudy materials into precious, tenuous structures. Each piece has a personality, and through hours of obsessive labor, I construct its identity. They exist in layers that demand an intimate relationship with the viewer, concealing and revealing amalgams of plastic and purities of light and space. So basically what that means is that, oh, I love the snaps. Basically what that means is I'm really interested in how we construct this idea of who we are and how we present that, that sense of self to other people. And all of it comes back to this, this world of fashion that I used to work in and live in and still kind of tangentially do work in. So starting off, all of my initial inspiration, the reason why I am the crazy person that I am is because of these people. So David Bowie, Joan Rivers, the Spice Girls, RuPaul, Dolly Parton, all of these people are people that are completely real and authentic, and they've shown the world exactly who they are. But it's through an artifice. They've created these identities for themselves. They've changed their identities throughout time. And it's this artifice that kind of like brings you into that world and intrigues you, and it's that sparkly, you know, shiny thing that catches your attention, and you're like, I need to know more about this. And so we can act like these things are like really fake, but really there's a lot of like truth and depth to these people. And I actually got into fashion specifically because of the Spice Girls, because in middle school, I would illustrate new costumes for all the Spice Girls in the margins of my notebooks, like when I was supposed to be taking notes, sometimes even on tests. And eventually I just really loved this idea of like creating these new sort of garments and identities for these women. And that kind of led to this world of fashion. So speaking of fashion, I love a makeover scene. I love this idea of taking somebody and really thinking about the clothes that we put on their body and how that will communicate to somebody else, like what we are, what we're about, who we are. You know, when I worked in fashion, I realized that I was just this dumb kid from Virginia who really didn't know what they were doing. So I had to kind of like fake it to make it. But it's that artifice that you build to be strong and to be confident in fashion, that allows people to see the talent that you actually have and allows them to see who you really are. And I think even in this movie, in Devil Wears Prada, everybody wants to think that Andy became some like fake bitch or something like that. But she became her best self, and her boyfriend and her friends were trash. And how dare they talk her out of that career, right? Thanks for those snaps. I don't know why this is okay. I don't know why that's in there. So I'm going to go through some of my my graduate research. While I was getting a degree in textiles, I was really focused on the reasons why we adorn our bodies and the sociological, anthropological sort of reasons why we put sparkly things on ourselves, right? And so we embellish and adorn because the textiles we wear serve to communicate complex information such as cultural identity, social status, and spirituality. And they also can serve as spiritual and physical protection. And I forgot to cite all these things, so it's been a while since I've done this presentation. I don't remember where this garment's from. Don't sue me, please. So one of these things, cultural identity, are the beads and patterns that we put on garments, or that cultures have put on for thousands of years, communicate oneness with a group. You think about indigenous American tribes and the ways that the patterns and colors and materials that they use to adorn their bodies and their garments are specialized for each specific tribe. And you can identify who's a part of your tribe based on what they're wearing. It's a non-verbal form of communication that it communicates a lot of information all at once. And it expresses a sense of self and one's role in the social structure. And you can think about, in more contemporary terms, the punks of like the 70s and 80s, like into today, you know, are expressing who they are and to each other and to the rest of like normal society, that like, hey, we're different than you. We belong together, right? And so that's how we use our clothes to kind of connect with other people. Wealth and social status. The first sequins were actually gold coins with a hole in the center that stitched a garment. So people would actually carry their wealth and symbols of that on their bodies. Precious, expensive materials establish and reinforce financial and social standing within a group and boost self-esteem of the wearer. The skill involved in the craft of a garment indicates the income necessary to pay for such work. So the more elaborate your garment, the more important or powerful or rich you are. And so there's those things you can communicate, and you can kind of develop an hierarchy in society based on what you're wearing. And you think about, you know, somebody like wearing a Louis Vuitton or something, carrying a Chanel bag, right? Then that's communicating to somebody like there's a different level here, right? Spirits, or it communicates that you're, you know, bad with your credit card limits, right? Some cultures believe that silver and iron possess power over good and evil. The metals had souls. 4,000 years ago, reflections were seen as the visible manifestation of one's soul. And reflective surfaces create a connection between our world and the spirit world. So putting shiny things on our bodies doesn't just make us feel pretty and sparkly. It doesn't just catch people's attentions, but in a lot of cultures, it connects us to something deeper and more spiritual, and it becomes a manifestation of our own souls and our bodies. And protection, this is one of my favorite reasons. Beads transfer the strength of the hard materials to the wearer. Like, you can actually be protected physically by the things embroidered onto your body, or reflective surfaces protect against the evil eye. And so the first glance from the evil eye is supposed to be seen as the most powerful. So if somebody looks at you and you're wearing sparkly sequins, they're distracted and they look at the sparkles first. You see my sparkles? Yeah, so you see the sparkles first, but not their eye. So that first glance has been sort of, I don't know, it's not as powerful anymore. So, and it reflects it back at the person and kind of is like, hey, I'm rubber and you're glue. You get the evil eye instead, right? So there's all these reasons why we wear it. So in my graduate thesis, I decided to make these garments that would express the lives and identities of the people that they were made for. This is a self-portrait of me. Some other portraits of my friends, Kate and Claire. And so all of the hand embroidery on these garments, it's laser cut sequins that have icons and symbols and patterns and textures that all tell stories from their lives. There's stories of divorce and death, cancer, rape. There's all of these things that have kind of built each of these individuals into who they are today, and kind of making that embellishment on them something that's fabulous, something that's eye-catching, something that makes someone want to come up and talk to you at a party if you're wearing, right? Drawing them in and forcing in an intimate connection with other people, based only on like exactly who you are and how you formed your identity, right? And so in grad school, like, I'm queer, right? Obviously. I was really interested in this stuff about identity, but I didn't want it to just be a queer artist. So I decided that I could tell stories for all people with these things. This wedding gown here, for instance, I told the story of this couple's relationship, and all of the embroidered sequins and patterns and hand-painted lace on here all had different symbols and memories from their relationship together. And I felt like this sense of identity is something that relates to everybody and not just me as a queer person. I never wanted to be seen as just a gay artist. So here's another one. Oh, and there was a series of like taking the garments off and figuring out who people are with them on and with them off and all this other stuff. And so I think it was like kind of powerful to see the transition from it being in a pile on the floor to it being on the body. And then I would make these huge art installations. So all of the different special sequins I made for everybody, I laser cut out of dichroic acrylic. And so these are giant versions of all those sequins, making like a giant installation that sort of like fills an entire room. And they all got installed in a yoga studio at SCAD, actually, when they bought the installation from me. So moving on from grad school and moving on from the garments, I started making this work. I became very interested in the idea of creating intimate moments with artificial objects. And maybe I didn't have to tell specific stories, but I could use the structure of fashion and couture embroidery to kind of draw you in And all of these bits of plastic and glass and broken jewelry and gaudy, tacky toddlers and tiara sort of materials could actually cause you to have an intimate moment with a piece of artwork. And then eventually it was this idea of creating something precious out of something cheap and gaudy. And so I would create something very precious, and then I would destroy that preciousness. I would kind of cover up the embroidery with paint and rubber, and I think I did cement one time. And so I would kind of think about the ways that we take everything that's special about ourselves and the way that we can kind of like gloss over it, and we can kind of make an amalgam of it and remove everything that's like special and glittery and perfect about it, and create just a flat surface. Here's one. Don't even remember the name of this piece. But right, so you get this like matte paint that kind of comes in and destroys. There's no going back from that. But I found that like leaving part of the embroidery showing, that's kind of like the bits of you that are special, that kind of like come out from behind, you know, this sort of glossed over version of yourself that you might present to people. And that like makes you want to see what's underneath of there. But at a certain point, you can't see underneath of these. I started creating these bigger pieces that were kind of paintings of sequins and embroidery. I thought about, well, does everything have to be hidden? Could there be this like push and pull between structure and rigidity and what we're trying to present of ourselves, and then the chaos of what consumes when our actual lives and identities sort of come out from that. I did this whole series. There's a whole poem that went along with them, and I don't remember the titles because I'm blanking. So I'm really nervous today. You might be surprised. So yeah, so it's creating these surfaces, and this is like cheap, like drag queen fabric and plastic rhinestones and sequins, but you know, showing these in galleries and museums and stuff. You know, kind of recontextualizing the material and what is real and what is authentic or artificial. So eventually I started trying to work in figurative imagery because I'm a fashion designer and I draw bodies, and I love the body, and I was getting kind of, it was dead working on just the wall. And it was a little too esoteric. Like it was really hard to like connect those pieces specifically back to identity if you weren't actually thinking about my artist statement. I wasn't here to explain it to you. So I would create these pieces in layers of these figures, not looking at you, and kind of exploding with the different layers of the identity. Like you can see, it's on like a sheer silk, and there's more stuff behind it, and there's stuff growing on top of it, and kind of thinking about all the layers that we peel back of who we are. And so from there, I started working with these sort of line drawings of me. I used to be a gymnast growing up. You know, I'm very in tune with my body, and was very interested in finding this balance between strength and vulnerability, in between masculinity and femininity. Someone's calling me, don't call me. And so I was creating these sort of rhinestone stitched drawings that eventually became these pieces, I guess, here that I showed before I got there. And I started thinking about identity and about the frames work that we exist in, and what society, how it wants to box us in. And so I created this work with frames, going back to thinking about mirrors and portals to the soul and the spirit world. You know, I decided to use flesh, to use fur, because I'm a lifelong vegetarian, but for some reason the research just led me to this direction where I had to use actual skin to kind of illustrate the self, which is the fakeness, the rhinestones coming out of something natural. But for me, that is the self. Is Jalinda texting me? 5-minute warning, I'm running out of time. I ramble. And so this piece is called Where Do I End and You Begin? And it's supposed to be a portrait of me abstractly in the center, and then the mirror kind of pulls in the viewer, and kind of you think about how the viewer affects my presentation of myself or who I am to around anybody else. These were seen as a series of self-portraits as well, kind of where I am inside the frame and how my body exists beyond that. And so I started doing these pieces where I would draw my body on these antique crumbling broken mirrors with Swarovski crystals and kind of create this entire figure. And this figure right here, I think I got to the point in examining these bodies and these representations of me and who I am, and how the world is reflected in my idea of what I am and who I am and what my identity is, that I got to this point with this piece that took a year to make. This is like 4.5 feet tall. Where I realized that I think that my identity and who I thought I was all along wasn't actually me. And so this work, very specifically this piece, helped me realize that I'm actually not a gay man and that I'm a non-binary person, and that that I exist somewhere in between masculinity and femininity, and playing with these dichotomies, realized that I don't lie on either end of it, and that I really exist in the middle, and that there's days where I feel like a woman, days that I feel like a man, and most days where I feel like gender isn't anything to me. And so at like 35 years old, I'm finally realizing what I think I've felt my entire life, and it was this work and the study of identity that led me there. And so I've been experimenting more with these figures, embroidering them with my sewing machine, kind of painting with a thread, working with these two figures on the left are non-binary celebrities, you know, kind of creating this soft and this hard, this reflection and this madness. There's a portrait of me that is at the Court Gallery in Charlottesville right now for their show Hello There. And it's called Soft. And it's kind of thinking about who I am and how I present, and thinking about my male body and my feminine energy. This piece, I don't remember the name of, but it's one of the larger embroideries I've done. You're doing the same thing that I've been doing, working with the dichotomy of strength, vulnerability. All of them kind of exist on these sort of rocky surfaces that are kind of tumbling out beneath them, or they're falling, or thinking about the idea that there's no stability in identity, that it can change at any time. And I think that's it for my talk, and I just rambled through to the end, but I think we're gonna take questions.
Yes,
what else is on?
We have quite a few questions.
Okay, cool.
You can hear me, Lindsay? Can I get a thumbs up?
Yes, okay. Michelle's gonna navigate that.
Do I need to stop share and send it back to you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So one of the first questions that came through the chat already was, did you have other trends that you dabbled in, and this is from Rachel, that you liked or disliked between fashion for the Spice Girls to sequins? Were there other trends that you explored?
I don't know. There was a while in undergrad that I was very interested in just like simple vintage like day dresses, and I thought I would just like design like simple cotton dresses for like anthropology or something. I also dabbled in children's wear and menswear for a little bit, but I think I repressed the need for the sequins for a long time. I think like my father told me at one point in high school, he's like, you can be gay, but just don't be a fairy. And so I had this idea of like, okay, there's a certain like type of queer that I'm allowed to be. And so I kind of repressed some of that. And then it was like grad school that all of the sequins kind of exploded out again.
The sequins are awesome. So Jenny wants to know if you can talk a little bit about your passion for thrifting and how you repurpose materials.
I am obsessed with thrifting. I do it all the time with my best friend, Lauren Healy. She owns Blue Bones Vintage. and I help her shop for her store, but I do it for myself too. I find a lot of embroidered beaded garments at thrift stores for like $5. And I have basically a library of them where I have over 60 of these garments that I've collected, and I use them as inspiration. Sometimes I cut them up and make them into things. Like some of those pieces that you saw, those embroideries with the figures and all the sparkles around them. Those are actually like cut up old, gowns that I've used in the work. I love thrifting. I love finding a good deal. Found a Balenciaga sweater for $4. Givenchy bag for $10. I love thrifting a lot.
So RVA Ange texted that she likes the juxtaposition of your clothes on and off as a theme and identity. And she went on and added a question about your personal journey and how it influenced the idea of artificial versus real and what's hidden in your work. So I think she's looking a little bit more about your personal journey and how it's reflected in your art.
So I think that as a queer person, we learn very young, as I was telling you about my father, right? That how to be who society needs us to be. I think we learn very young how to code switch, and that's being one person in places where it's safe to be queer and lowering your voice and walking a bit straighter, somewhere else for your own safety. So I think queer people have this really unique understanding of what it is to be fake, what artifice is, how to construct your identity in a self-preservational way. And so I think that's why queer people are so drawn to the fantastic and ridiculous and artificial, but also why we can be like very authentic and very real, and very open about our lives. I think I just went off on a tangent, but I think that's why I'm interested. I'm interested in how, when I put on clothes every day, is it a costume that I'm putting on? Is it a greater expression of who I really am inside? Do the clothes physically affect the way that I exist in the world? And I'm really interested in things like, like if you're in mourning and you decide that you're going to wear all black, you make that decision to put on those black clothes in the morning before you leave the house, and you're preparing yourself mentally and physically for being in the world and being around other people. And you're also communicating to other people non-verbally, very specifically what state of mind and where you are in your life, right? I think clothes have a really powerful way of doing that. When I was doing the thesis with the clothes kind of coming on and off in those photos in the stages, there was one girl who I photographed, and the whole piece was about like her divorce and her mother's death and releasing the first 30 years of her life. So we did a lot of shots of the garment on her, and then we started to like slowly take it off of her. And then when it dropped to the ground and like hit the floor and you could hear the beads just kind of clunk, she started crying, because she said it was this release of all of these things that she'd had been carrying around her whole life. It was a physical manifestation of taking those things off of her and creating a new life. So that's why I'm really interested in not just what we're wearing, but why we're wearing it and when we take it off and when we put it on. Yeah.
Michael-Birch, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jolinda. We are out of time. We had a